The following is a conversation with Alastair MacGibbon. Alastair's extensive experience, leadership roles, and advocacy have made him one of the most recognised and respected figures in Australian cybersecurity. His insights and guidance continue to shape the nation's approach to managing cyber risks and building resilience. He is an internationally recognised speaker, and you may have seen or heard him on Australian news. Thank you, Alastair, for your time. Subscribe to the Bytes podcast for more conversations like this.
Let's talk about that human element, Alastair. Ransomware attacks can have some pretty severe psychological impacts on individuals because there's that, there's a bit of shame involved and self-blame. So how can the individuals sort of, get over it, so to speak, and how can organisations better support their people when there's a lot of mental health issues around that self-blame?
Well, no one expects, and particularly no one loves to be the victim of crime, right? And we need to understand that with these online crimes and ransomware and data theft extortion being such prolific crimes, you're at work on a Tuesday and it's a normal day, and then suddenly Wednesday, it looks like your organisation isn't even going to function again, right? And for the teams that are responding to it 24/7, for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks sometimes. So lack of sleep, improper diet, the pressure of a criminal that is actively trying to harm you. Mm-hmm. One of the things that makes a cyber crime different to perhaps a natural disaster or some other traumatic event is a criminal inside your systems acts and reacts to cause harm. Mm. So it is traumatic, there's no doubt, and it does cause harm to people. And we have teams in CyberCX that respond to between 300 to 500 incidents a year, some of them pretty serious. And so we see that type of trauma that it actually causes on teams. I'll sit with chairs of boards or CEOs of organisations or the CIO or others, and you can actually see it in them, the harm it causes them. And I'm a former police officer, and it's the same as the type of trauma you see that are victims of offline crime. Mm. So yes, it causes harm. It causes burnout in teams, there's no doubt. I mean, it's not all darkness. I mean, I would always say to an organisation that we'll get through it. Our job is to help them find the least worst decision in one of their worst ever series of days and continually make decisions to try to get them out. And largely they do, right? Most of them keep their jobs, the organisations largely survive, the criminal gets evicted, and we move on with our lives. But there is some harm, there's no doubt, and a lot of learnings. Upside is there are organisations like CyberMinds. Mm-hmm. An old friend of mine, Peter Coronius, brought that to Australia. I think it's a really important thing for teams that work in security to have that option if they feel like they need to learn how to better cope, because we do know there's burnout in the security industry.
Absolutely, and it's great that there's an organisation like that out there, so that it isn't just a technical problem. There is an organisation that you can turn to for that mental well-being. So I guess that's talking about resilience in a way. So if you've been ransomware, so to speak, what would the first steps be for an organisation? What would you recommend?
So there's a couple of bits to unpack from that. So yes, just onto the issue, it's a technical crime, right? It's driven by technology, but it's a human thing, right? Mm-hmm. Humans, these criminals cause harm to monetize. So if you are in an incident, there are key things that are run in parallel. An organisation is going to want to know, is this the extent, what is the extent of the harm? What have the criminals done to us? Because it's not always just in quotes, ransomware where they lock up computer systems. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting evolutions of this crime in the last couple of years has been this data theft extortion, where they'll be inside systems, steal data, contact you and say, we've got your stuff, pay us or we'll release it.
Or we've got this sensitive information, we're going to show people.
Right, and they'll do the proof of life stuff. They'll send you things to prove that they've got that. And that's very different to, hey, I've locked up your computer system, because usually you can tell what's been locked up because, hey, it's not working. Mm-hmm. So this discovery piece really quickly, what have they done? What have they touched? Are they still in our systems?
How long were they in the system prior to us uncovering it?
And we see this regularly. people want to know those answers on the day, and it takes a long time. So our teams will spend with victims days, weeks, sometimes months to understand that. But that starts on day one. What have they done? What are they doing? Can you tell me that they're out? You need to do, in parallel, you need to start thinking about what does your future state look like? Mm-hmm. So what are the things we need to put in place, not just once we've evicted this criminal, but how do we stop them coming in again? And that really should start on day one. And then something that I think is a really big development in the last couple of years, largely starting with the Optus incident, which is now coming up to a couple of years ago, which is quite incredible, is the collateral impact of stakeholders. How do stakeholders react? Yes. So I've been in this game a long time, decades, and it was often seen just as technical, and no one really cared or considered much about how does the rest of the community react.
The flow and effect to that
and
crime.
So we've had this. So I often now say there are two harms in an incident. There's the technical harm. You want to draw the chalk line around the body or the blast radius of this thing. And then there's the stakeholder harm. How's the community reacting? And we're often seeing that being the outsized risk and harm now, which is fascinating. So in parallel, on the same day, on day zero, it's starting to understand who are your stakeholders, who cares about this. That's customers and clients. It's going to be your staff. It might be your shareholders or investors. It might be regulators. It might be the government more broadly. It's all of the organisations that have third-party relationships with you, and what they're now doing when they see you've got an incident is they turn off their connectivity with you, which almost does the criminal's job for them.
Yes.
So it creates this issue where if you weren't bricked by the criminal at the start of the day, by the end of the day, society has done it for you.
You're isolated.
Right, and so and that's a communications issue as much as anything. How do I give confidence that, hey, we know what the offender's doing? Refer above when I say it can take days, weeks, months to know, and that we aren't a collateral risk to you. And then the public and the political class in particular have a voracious appetite for understanding what's occurring. And you can never do that fast enough. So they're the things that I think happen on day zero. You work really hard to try to make day zero not become day 365.
Sensationalist, because journalists will, in that vacuum of information, they'll just conflate everything, and that's when it gets out of control.
Yep.
I'd love to touch on a couple of things that you mentioned where it's the worst decision you can make out of the best decisions that are available to you. And I think that's a great way to put it, with in particular respect this human element of things. You spoke on Q&A not long ago after the Medibank incident about the empathy for the organizations also going through these things. And I do think that extends to the individuals within the organization and, those that may actually be responsible for the incident occurring and such. And that level of empathy from the community and understanding these are human problems that will be rectified and can be mitigated, but do happen. And it's about the transparency around the impacts and the stakeholders involved and things like that. Do you find that the empathy for staff within the organizations is there, with the understanding that these are honest mistakes sometimes that can be made?
So it's a really interesting question. I'll start with my first principles and all this is these organisations are victims. And in the offline world, police officers and magistrates and society learnt to stop saying to a victim, how did you let that happen to you?
Yes.
Why, why were you walking where were you walking? Why were you with the person that caused this harm? That was learnt the hard way by magistrates and police officers sort of saying that to people. And so we've learnt that in the offline world. However, there is always a thing organisations and people can do to reduce likely harm, to reduce the likelihood of being victimised. And that's a separate discussion that we have to have as a community. On the day an organisation becomes a victim, we should treat them like a victim. That doesn't mean you forgive them for allowing themselves to be a victim, but this is a complex world. So we're running complex systems. There's an awful lot of entropy and complexity in what we're trying to protect, right? Old systems, you can never replace them as fast as technology moves. Complex systems because people are behind them, and you're in the business of helping educate people on how to be safe, right, and secure, and not be that threat vector. Because every intelligence agency and every criminal really targets a person. They might do it via technology, but it's about people and how do you harden them, right? How do you make them less likely to fall victim? So treat them like victims, also as organisations that both need to learn themselves and provide a lesson to us as a society. But if you keep it as blaming, as a blame culture, how did you let this happen to you? We're going to come after you. It doesn't engender a conversation. It doesn't engender sharing and learning. 100%. One of the reasons why the airline industry, with a few classic and terrible examples of how they failed in this process, one of the reasons why airlines were so secure for so long, so safe, was because they, if any of them saw a fault, staff that walked past it were the ones that were punished, not the ones that responded to it. And secondly, all of them shared with each other, including their competitors, because they said
that's a very crucial aspect.
If one plane had a problem, all planes have a problem. It's about confidence in the system. We've not translated that into technology more broadly, but that's one of the ways that we will get through this as humans, and we will get to that point. At the moment, we're still in the very early blame game stage. It's only lasted about 20-something years, and I'd hope for us to mature enough to get it, to say, hey, complex systems, if there was something that you were that you are liable for because it was a really obvious thing that you should have done, that's a very different thing to saying, hey, you run complex systems, and guess what? Criminals and intelligence agencies are pretty smart and persistent, and they will find fault in your systems.
Absolutely. I think another from that Q&A discussion was if in the real world offline, perpetrators were coming up to your house and knocking on the door and shaking the windows trying to see if they could get in, we'd all be revolting in the streets. But in online, while that's not visible to the general public or even necessarily the system administrators, they're trying. They're knocking on the doors. They're trying to figure out where those holes are all the time. So it is a constant vigilance aspect, and I think security culture within organizations.
And people are left on their own at that point too. So if you
we're completely on our own.
If you do click on a phishing link, it's your personal failing for not being perfect at spotting that. And how stupid could you be for like clicking on that link? And it's just not about that. It's the sophistication is really good, and we can't expect perfection from individuals or big companies at this point.
Well, we have the defender's dilemma, right? We've got to be correct 100% of the time. The offender only needs to be right once. On the issue of offenders coming right up to our doors and rattling them, it's the analogy's right. If in the offline world, criminals or nation-state threat actors were coming up to this office that we're in today and literally trying to kick the door in, you would expect a police force to be there. Or if it was a foreign military, which is the case sometimes, obviously electronically, you'd expect a military response. In fact, some of this would be an act of war.
Yes.
If it was done in the offline world. I'll use the example that we've seen recently, Volt Typhoon, which is China state sitting on critical infrastructure in the United States, not with the intention of spying, but with the intention, for the first time we've ever seen China, of destruction of critical infrastructure at a time of heightened conflict. And the Australian government and the UK, Canada and New Zealand came out at the same time, sort of implying this could be here in our systems too. And yet the advice is for organisations, hey, go and try to find it. Again, we haven't developed, and I'm not being critical of government, I was part of it for a long time, but we haven't developed the parallel systems of collective community support to fight crime and nation states online the way we have offline. And that means each organisation and each individual has to do their best in a toxic, high threat world with complex systems that by their nature are vulnerable and reduce the likelihood of something going wrong. In that equation, something goes wrong.
Yeah, too many moving parts to really keep it 100% compliant all the time.
And there's the commercial aspect as well, because if you want to put that the onus on your Microsofts for saying, okay, well, your systems are out there in everyone's devices, so that was your problem to solve and to prevent. Off you go. At what point does the government have that oversight to control it from the get-go rather than just passing that blame on?
Yeah, and these are complex things. We want complex things to be done by technology. And again, I mentioned earlier this concept of natural disasters, because often we look at this in a natural disaster type complex, how we respond. But unlike fire or flood, which is very harmful, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't intentionally go out to hurt you. Water just tries to find the lowest point it can get to, and fire just burns where
Consumes
it can burn.
what it
This is an offender that is actively going out to find vulnerabilities and actively reacting to what you do and actively trying to cause harm or whatever their objective is. That's a really different scenario. And so I feel for the organisations, and this will win me heaps of friends online, where I'll defend someone like Microsoft and say, hey, we want them to do all these things in a really toxic environment where there's emboldened threat actors. Can they do more? Of course. And I must say, and I think to their credit, they have done more over the last decade or so, and I'm sure they'll do more as they go forward because they don't want to be vulnerable. They have no interest in vulnerabilities because it affects their brand. But on the commercial bit, we understand organisations still need to run businesses. I mean, we all run businesses. We're all part of businesses or in government. The reality is that you're not security businesses. Most businesses just want to get on and do what they do.
They've got a product to sell, and that's what they want to do
They
best.
might make toasted sandwiches down the corner. They're not a security business, right? So, hey, are they vulnerable? Yes, but they make good toasties. So the same goes for the whole economy. So we need to be respectful too, that if everyone spent all of their time and effort in trying to stop bad things happening, they wouldn't be providing the services that actually has the economy spinning.
Yeah.
It is interesting in that I've recently done a couple of courses on development for developer secure coding and aligning to OWASP and zero trust and things of that nature. And one of the things that seems to be a common approach with that side of the industry is the idea of shifting left, and the premise being that throughout the entire software development lifecycle, rather than doing security as an afterthought, security is the first thing you do. You shift security left across the cycle, meaning that security is a critical aspect of every point between the design, the analysis, development, and then deployment of the application. I do wonder if similarly shifting left in some of these technological organizations and making security a priority would lessen the area of vulnerability that occurs where, I actually mentioned this on a previous podcast, I reset my Microsoft password recently, and I got it from an email from the domain microsoft-onlineservices.com. Highly suspect domain, easily something a scammer could register, and I feel like that lack of social proof and knowing who to actually trust is something that scammers do leverage against us, because it is something that you would expect Microsoft.com or Office.com, but instead comes from these kind of nebulous other properties that sit within the organization. And I do wonder if in time, as you say, when they do become more security conscious and less around not focusing on the services of the business, but encasing that in an element of security and assurance
trust as well,
and trust, that stuff becomes less, and potentially, obviously, with the wide nature of teams and the size of the organization of Microsoft, it's easier said than done, but that's something I think would benefit all of the community globally, in that the scammers won't have as much leverage to kind of jump on, I don't actually know if this is to be trusted. If that absence of the right or wrong, or this is the proof, that makes it a lot harder for the layman individual.
Yeah, and I think Microsoft, if we focus on Microsoft, you're welcome, Microsoft. I think they're on that journey, right? So they were the ones, I think they were the first big corporate to actually start down that process of sort of secure by design. But it's a big labyrinthine beast, right? And I suspect every time they get to a point where they've made advancements, someone else pops up something new.
Another team, another strategy.
Yeah, but so long as you have it built into your DNA, and again, Friendly Phishing spends its time trying to educate people on this sort of at that human layer. But yeah, I think we can do a lot more in that secure coding, security by design space, where the security function in an organization is about leading some of the sort of more esoteric bits, making sure those bits are done, but that every person in the organization actually does incrementally something for security as they go about that.
Everyone's responsibility, right?
Yep.
And that's the thing, whether it be someone tailgating in the office, whether it be preventing networks and working in a SOC, everyone...
Well, tailgating is a classic example, right? Because all of us with a pass should make sure that a person's coming in the door with you also has a pass and authority to be there. But you still might have security guards. But the security guard shouldn't be the person that's calling out the tailgater. That should be us.
Someone who knows who should be here.
Yeah. And so there's this, that's that same concept. And, I way back in police days, we were told, don't let people tailgate, right? And so that was our job, even though if you had guards that were there in the buildings, the same logic needs to apply for our online activities, the way we code, the way we build things, and on it goes, because it's not a foolproof method, but it certainly takes the burden off a security team. And that's what
it's that extra layer that you need. I do feel though with people these days. So obviously for the police, that's probably a really easy thing to say. Hey, you're not supposed to be here. For the average person that might not have the social skills or the emotional intelligence to sort of stop and say, actually, I'm not going to let you follow me in. That's very confrontational. So I think we've got a bit of a gap there with that physical security.
We taught to be polite too,
yeah.
right? I'll hold the door open for you.
Yeah.
And that's how...
Can I help you? Can I carry that inside? Can I carry that outside?
That's how red teamers get into buildings, right? Red teamers being the people that test both physical and electronic security, or test electronic security by breaching the physical security. That's how they get into buildings, right? And data centers and other such things is using that exact same politeness that we have beaten into us as a society. But it's not impolite to say to a person, hey, I'd love to help you. Who are you here to see?
Yeah. Are you lost?
Do you not have your pass today? Yeah. Let's go and get you another one. That type of stuff. So there are ways, I think, to be polite and decent while reducing the likely harm.
It's sort of like shrinkage in the retail world. If a shop attendant comes up to someone and says, hi, can I help you? Can I help you find your size? If that was a suspect person or they had that in their mind, that will alert that person to, okay, this person's actually doing their job. I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah. Yep.
As opposed to, I will proceed with caution because, someone being onto security in a physical way like that will scare them off pretty quickly.
It's about being empowered to act on security as well. Like knowing, I don't know if that person should be there. Not my problem. I'll just keep doing
someone else's problem.
Someone else's problem.
But you can also just introduce yourself.
You can also just let the appropriate personnel, hey, I just noticed something. Can you kind of suss it out? I think it's about that empowerment to everyone's part of security within the organization, whether they're doing something technical, whether they're customer facing, whether they're receptionists that see the front of house and see the individuals coming to the organization. Security is very much one of those things where the more apparent it is for every individual, the less likely that risk is going to be for that organization. Did you have a question? Sorry.
No. Okay.
Sorry. I did wonder, Alastair, given the global nature of these kind of ransomware attacks and how they cross borders very significantly, both with the perpetrators being from potentially overseas, but also the cross impacts from supply chains of different organizations, how can we as a global community potentially work better to lessen the impacts and potentially even bring these people to case on what they've done?
Yeah. Well, the vast bulk of ransomware threat actors, vast bulk of what is a pretty ephemeral and fast-moving group or groups of people are overseas.
Yes.
Most cybercrime coalesces around these safe harbours where the rule of law is weak. But that's not dissimilar to any organised crime. And the way you fight, I draw lessons from the fight against offline organised crime for online organised crime.
Okay.
Because I'm a simple type of guy. Why create something new if there's methodologies that at least push some type of cost into criminals offline? And that's the key language that I think we need to use. How do we push cost into them? Criminals are very rational creatures. So if we start with what their ultimate objective is, which is, I want to make money.
As much of it as possible.
Much of it with the smallest calorie burn possible. Very rational, a bit like the rest of us. Want to make as much money with least amount of effort and, less risk. Great. Well, if that's what they want, how do we change that equation for them? Let's leave the money bit aside for the moment because that'll get us down the rabbit hole of do we ban ransom payments, which I'm more than happy to give them a view of the word on. But then let's talk about the calorie burn and the risk piece. So there are ways that we can reduce the likelihood of ransomware and data theft extortion because they're two sides of the same sort of crime through our technical controls and our people controls. Let's take that as done. What about the risk piece? Well, as I said, they go to safe havens where the rule of law is low. Why wouldn't you commit this crime, right? Like, technically
It pays.
It pays well.
It pays.
I can Google how to do it. I can get other people to do the stuff for me. So the cost of entry for me is quite low. The success is high.
You can buy software to just
I can rent it. I can rent people to do it for me, right? I can get initial access brokers who can get me into the organisation. They've already stolen the credentials. I can have people that can do data exploitation for me. I've got people that can host my website. I mean, I can just...
They're software as a service companies. You just go online, know where to sign up, and you get a...
Just like I can rent myself a botnet or other such things if that's what I'm into, right? So, in other words, low cost of entry and, very importantly, low consequences for my actions. Again, why wouldn't you do it? Which is why we've got this proliferation of groups. So, I mentioned the offline world and what's been done. Australia is really outsized, powerful in the law enforcement world. It has people posted to as a percentage of the population more than anyone else in the world. So really strong reach overseas, working with law enforcement agencies in countries that people would be surprised to know the Australian Federal Police work in. So that lets you start bringing law enforcement in those countries to bear on the criminal enterprise, whether it's on or offline. Now, Russia's a problem at the moment, of course. When I was running the High-Tech Crime Centre in 2002, 2003, 2004, Russian police cooperated with us, so we could actually reach into Russia. Can't do it now for pretty logical reasons. They did invade their neighbour. There are sanctions against them, and frankly, President Putin kind of likes the criminal groups causing harm to the West.
As long as they're not internally targeting Russia?
As long as they don't target Russia or Russia's allies, they have a green light, in fact, encouragement to do so. And it adds to his infamy. Whenever Russia gets blamed, it's good. It makes Russia look powerful and strong. So you're not going to get into Russia. But these Russian criminals do travel, right? They don't get our hard-earned cash and convert it to themselves to keep it inside Russia. They do like to travel. They like to buy yachts. They like to create in quotes legitimate investments with their ill-gotten gains. All of those things are legitimate targets of law enforcement. We need to do more of that. I think, to the credit of law enforcement in Australia, and particularly the sort of Five Eyes friends, we saw the UK recently take some really splendid action against some of those ransomware groups. We've seen the Americans do it in the past. Australia's part of those operations. We also
called out a recent Russian ransomware individual from not entering Australia as well.
I suspect he didn't lose a lot of sleep over it, but naming them takes away that veil of anonymity. The concept of anonymity and I'm untouchable and unidentifiable is a really important part of that risk equation for them. So pierce that veil a bit, go after assets, take down their websites. What do we learn from those most recent takedowns? A few things. Data theft extortion criminals do not delete the data when they claim they would. Well, there's a shocking surprise. They are criminals after all, the same ones that broke into your system and stole your data and then demanded cash in exchange. Well, weirdly, don't delete it once they get paid.
Who would have thunk?
So there's actually would have thunk it. Yeah. Where we do know payment works, and this is where I get a bit more controversial than some people, is if they've locked your computer systems, they will provide the key. That's the business model, right?
And so that's actually something fascinating with the rep of different ransomware gangs. Some of them very much pride themselves on the fact that if we say we'll give it to you, we'll give it to you because it's actually for our benefit that you know.
Well, that's the business model.
That's
right?
the
business model, which is why when people say to me, shouldn't we just ban payments? Well, of course, I hate the concept of paying criminals, but there's different types of crimes here. For ransomware, where they lock computer systems, and if you have no way to recover those computers, particularly if someone's going to die, let's say you run a power grid or a hospital or a transport link, you know what? Payment might be a legitimate option. It's not one you like, but it's one that might be the most viable and rational thing to do.
The best of the worst options available to you.
Exactly. The least crap decision you can make on the day. So there's that. But data theft extortion, completely different. Now, there's still a potential argument, by the way, to say maybe to pay. Now, let me try to unpack why I say that. One, it's not for your own reputation or your business reputation. That's already now tarnished because people know that it's been stolen. The criminals already told the world. They put it on their data leak site that you're a victim. But there might be people whose data you hold where it's actually in your interest, in their interests, for you to pay on the off chance, because it is just a chance, the criminals won't further exploit that information. So there's still, I'd say it's not a high argument to make, and I certainly don't make it with most organisations that we deal with, but for some I will say to them, this is a legitimate option for you. It's also not illegal because you're under duress. Now, so it's illegal, of course,
You're a victim, as you said.
You're a victim, and we need to remember that. And again, going back to that concept of trauma, I sit with those companies, I sit with those CEOs and those boards when they go through these terrible days. They're busy making toasties most of the time, right? Or whatever it is that their business is. They're not there thinking about crime and criminals, and certainly they've never sat them around the board table before asking or being told, here's what you're going to do if you want to keep your company. So let's remember these people are victims. But yes, I think there's ways to push cost into criminals to change their risk calculus. Nation state's completely different. They have a totally different risk calculus and different motivations. But for the criminals, who are the bulk of the problem, for the bulk of the people in our communities, they are rational creatures. And they're not likable creatures, but they're rational creatures. You can, if you understand what their motive is and you understand what their risk calculus and their cost equations are, you can reduce the likelihood of them causing crime.
It's almost indistinguishable from a legitimate business, really. It's just the intent.
Yeah, it's just more profitable, and they're nasty. And they make money out of harming people, which is very different to most normal businesses.
What I do find really interesting is, I guess, the entering the negotiation process, and not necessarily with the view to pay, but having that kind of communication with the threat actor or the person that's currently within the system, and knowing what they've exfiltrated, what they have access to, what would the cost be, how long do we have to get back to you. That stuff really does help, I believe, I would think, organizations in getting their ducks in order with how to respond, how to make those best decisions out of the worst decisions available. It really comes down to no one wants to be in that situation, but if you have
you raise a really interesting point, and that is that there is a big difference between talking to the criminal group and paying the criminal group. And whenever we talk to victim organisations and a criminal has contacted them, and we say, look, we should talk to the criminal, often the CEO or the chair of the board will think, oh, no, I'm not going to pay. It's like, no, you don't have to pay. But talking to them is often the fastest way that we're going to find out exactly what they've done, because you can get them into a situation where they'll prove to you what they've got.
They even provide
you
a
while
data
our
dump.
technical teams are busy trying to re-establish that from logs, sometimes which criminals destroy or that don't exist inside an organisation. Yes. So there's that. There's buying time to allow you to then go and communicate with potentially affected parties. They're good things. Understand what the motive is of the criminal. Now, the motive is cash, but they are all slightly differently sort of like how angry they are. And by communicating with them, you can make them less angry and possibly less dangerous. The other thing I'd say to you is this, the last thing I'd say on this is, weirdly, sometimes these criminals don't do anything.
They just want to know they can?
Well, no, I think they get distracted. They're like the rest of us. I've got a to-do list.
They've got a lot of things going on.
I got a lot of things I want to achieve most days when I go to work, right? I want to get these 13 things done. I get to 5 and it's like, well, okay, I'll do that tomorrow. But then they get distracted and they might have a bigger target somewhere that they're really running down that rabbit hole, and they eventually just stop.
It's an interesting way to think about it.
I wouldn't bank on it, but it does happen. We've seen it happen, which is weird, but it does happen.
Yeah, I guess they're just like everyone else. It is a weird way of thinking of it that, okay, this threat actor is focusing on me. I need to, all systems go. But
it's likely they'll have other things on the go at the same time.
They've got a lot of hands and a lot of pies.
Yeah. Well, because if they haven't specifically targeted you,
and they're just targeting,
if they've either done a spray and pray, right, where they've just gone out and
they're just looking for a bite,
right, or they've bought credentials from an initial access broker who says, I've got these companies and they get in, yep, good, I'm in, or I've managed to use a phishing email or something that gets me there, or I've found a vulnerability, whatever, however they get in, they just might say, I've got a better target.
More juicy, more payoff. I'm going to focus on
less
this.
risk potentially.
What's the better return? They've only got a limited number of hours in the day, and they've got a number of jobs they want to get done. Again, like my weekend to-do list or my work to-do list, I don't always get them done.
And they have lives.
They have lives.
They might have to do some gardening as well.
They might have to go see mum at Christmas time too in Orthodox Easter. They might have to go somewhere too if they're Russian.
Buy some toasties.
Yeah.
Given that, I mean, all of these ransomware gangs and access brokerage groups have kind of lowered the barrier to entry for ransomware generally. And so now it's more about your intent than your skill set. If you have the intent, you can find a place that will provide you the service to then deploy that service. In a lot of ways, I've seen reports that the number of ransomware strains and number of ransomware incidents is increasing. However, the cost that the criminals are recouping is somehow reducing overall. Do you think that might be due to the competition in the space with just the sheer number of ransomware gangs competing for the cost ultimately?
Yeah, the criminal economy online is a fascinating one. I will say to you that it could be a range of things. It could be better technical controls, reducing some of the harm. So I think some of the reasons why the tactics have shifted over time is because of technical remediations that have been carried out, better backups.
Something's working.
Well, so if you've got better backups, then the ransomware piece itself becomes less useful to them.
You can just spin that back up.
Right. So instead I do data theft extortion. I think possibly, Benji, the answer to your question is, what is the harm that they've caused? If what they've done is steal your data, you're just not going to. You're either not going to pay. You're not going to pay as much if you do pay, than if you've locked up computer systems, which is a really rational equation. Hey, all of your computers are shut. You're not going to operate properly. So pay me or don't pay me, because you can't get these systems going. So I suspect that's the answer, though I don't know. It could be competition, could just be a real quirk of exchange rates or something. I don't know, because the only thing I do know is the lies and statistics piece around crime online is just as rife as it is about offline crime or anything else. So I don't mind the trends. I do worry sometimes about being too specific about crime stats online.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'd like to see it because people are more prepared and they're looking at their resilience, and hopefully that's just going to be an upward trend for the next, forever.
So yeah, I think in talking about all of these things, it comes down to a lot of this is the intent. If I want to hack someone, do I do it as one of the good guys, or do I go look elsewhere and see if there's an opportunity for me to make some quick cash? Given the, I guess, talent shortage that's facing the cybersecurity field, particularly here in Australia, do you have any insight into what could potentially convince more people to get involved in being one of the good guys?
I'd like to think most people are good, right? I think given a chance, most people actually want to do the right thing.
Yep.
When I left the Federal Police, I went to eBay, and they had a phrase that said, people are basically good. I spent my time working as an executive at eBay dealing with those people who weren't, of which there seemed to be enough who could try to abuse the system. So I think people are basically good, right? I mean, the average person wants to do the right thing, will do the right thing given a chance, certainly won't do a bad thing that they actually think is going to harm
They want to live in the society that we've built, and that requires being good.
So I think the vast bulk of people with technical skills want to do the right things with those technical skills. Yeah. I'm a glass half full guy. We know there's a shortage in cybersecurity technical people. There is. I mean, every study will tell you. CyberCX did one back a while ago. I think we said it was 35,000 people over the next couple of years, et cetera, et cetera. The numbers change. The big question is, how do you train more, or how do you need less? When I was in government would always decry someone being recruited out of government to a private sector entity. And I used to say it was like seagulls fighting over the same chip, right? Yes. So seagull grabs them, I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars. Someone comes by, rips them out of your beak, takes them away, offering them a certain amount more. And we've all seen seagulls fighting over that same chip. And this industry can be a bit like that. So we've got to change that dynamic. One is we need to push more people through that formal training piece. But as an organisation that is now the largest employer of cybersecurity people in the country, they're not necessarily job-ready people. So in order to solve some of that problem, as an organisation, we formed the CyberCX Academy, where we take people, in quotes, off the street. We're not asking anyone off the street. So we'll do psychometric testing, we'll look at what their motivations are, and we'll look at what their sort of innate technical skills are rather than their CV. Because I think for a long time we've hired to their LinkedIn profile. Hey, I want someone with 5 to 10 years experience in exactly the same job as I'm going to employ you for. They don't exist. Or if they do, we're strip mining, as I mix my analogies, from other people who deserve to have those people as well. So how do we add people to that gene pool? Exactly. So we committed to 500 people over 3 years. Shortly, I'll go to the graduation of cohorts 4 and 5 of our academy, where we bring people into the industry, not necessarily straight off the street, but often don't have any technical skills, and pay them from day one and train them from day one.
On site, here in the offices.
Yep. Yes. So teach them the skills that we need. Now, we don't pretend to those people they're going to be sort of like rocket scientists, not that we're producing them, or, star hackers, when we do produce those, and we certainly hire them, that they're going to be there at the end of the program, but they'll have a job and they'll have skills in whatever that stream that we train them in is. And I want to see more organisations doing that. The government used to be the one that would do that, right? Whether it's Department of Defence or some other place, the intelligence agencies. Now they still train. We need to train and then actually celebrate when people leave our organisations into that broader ecosystem. Give an example. When I was in the Australian Signals Directorate running the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, I had a really key staff member recruited by a very big company on the west coast of the United States. And some people saw that as to run a really key part of security for them. And some people were upset. And I said, well, I use those products. I'm really happy for a really talented security person to be over there. One, they pay that person really well, which that person deserved. They had family. They wanted to go and see a different part of the world. And guess what? They're going to come back to Australia at some point. We've got to stop seeing this.
Skills.
Yes, we've got to stop seeing it as a zero-sum game. Hey, you win, I lose, or I win, you lose. And instead say, what are we going to do to contribute to it? That sounds really a bit schmaltzy, but I actually
think so.
I actually think that's how we're going to solve this problem. We're going to solve it one training program at a time. I was at an organisation up the road just prior to being here, and they said, we've got 30 graduates in our program. Fantastic, right? That's up on what they had in previous years. And then I go to another organisation that says we're taking 4 people this year. Great, that's 4 more people into the industry. And a big river doesn't start as a big river; it starts as a raindrop. I'm going to get as many analogies as I can into this one thing. So create more bloody raindrops.
Absolutely.
Let's create those rivers of people, and then let's stop seeing it as something where we've got to have a person with 5 to 10 years experience, and instead say, I'm going to partner with you. This should be as much like apprenticeships as it was as university skills. How do we just get people in, teach them how to do it? They should go and get other education, don't get me wrong, as a finishing school, as a whatever, either do it before or after. But that's what we should do. If this industry is so vital, and we know it is, we wouldn't be growing as fast as we are if it wasn't so vital, then contribute into it. Make that contribution to society, because for far too long we've done, so it's either pay people more or offshore. And offshoring doesn't give you the DNA in your community that you need to then build it into your coding, build it into your design at the start of a process. You're just this sort of expensive wrapper at the end. That's not how you secure systems.
100%. And I think, in bringing the whole industry around sharing knowledge and seeing us as it's kind of us versus them, the bad guys, whatever you will, even people that may not necessarily be coming into this industry as their first industry of their working kind of career, the Academy has had many individuals come through that have changed careers wildly. Some were nurses previously and now are doing DFIR, digital forensics investigation, incident response. So I think, yeah, it's just about getting people interested in this.
And the transferable skills.
And their transferable skills.
Yeah, and look, you're onto something there too, which is the mission piece. And going back to what I said earlier, which is I think people are basically good, right? I mean, they are. You're giving people a chance to be in a profession that actively is defending their community and their society, right? I mean, it's actually noble. And you don't have to dig a trench and carry a firearm or do something else to actually be protecting your community.
Exactly.
In this profession, in cybersecurity, you can actually be doing that in a well-paid, white-collar way. It can be stressful, of course. Sometimes it's highly technical. Often it's not, right? It's about people and soft skills and the business side of the house. But you're protecting a community, and that's a pretty cool thing. So in terms of mission, North Star, I call it our Southern Cross. What's the guiding thing that has you sort of going to work each day? If you can have that Southern Cross that guides you, that's a pretty amazing addition to what is, well-paid white-collar work, where you're not going to go out of business anytime soon. They're all good things and should encourage people into this trade, into this series of professions that is broadly cybersecurity.
I think it's a career to be really proud of.
And it's very fulfilling. I mean, I'm not in a immediately highly technical role. I'm probably more in I understand technicalities, but I'm not necessarily involved in them in my day-to-day. But I love what I do. It makes me feel good what I do. And I think, the more people that can feel good about the work that they're putting out into the world and the communities and securing others and those that they care about, it kind of will only grow from there, the more people that get involved.
And I think generationally, that's what people want too, right? That sense of purpose. It's no longer just go and get a job, it's get a job with purpose. And I think that cybersecurity profession writ large, to your point, Benji, whether it's a highly technical role or a not highly technical role, that's just got goodness on it.
Yeah.
And combine that with the fact that it is, it's a good profession in and of itself, or series of professions. It's actually in that really good quadrant of type of work people should do.
Yeah.
I'm glad we've ended on such a warm, fuzzy
Me
note.
too.
It's
I like to be
really
happy.
nice. Yeah, we
You
can,
are quite a
we can walk
glass
out
half
of here.
full
I'm a glass half
gentleman.
full guy.
We can walk out of here feeling so good about what we're doing for society. Alistair, thank you so much for
Thank you,
being
Alistair.
a guest today.
Thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We've learned a lot. Looking forward to hopefully speaking with you again at some point.
Anytime.
Yeah, and for everyone listening and watching, don't forget to subscribe to Bytes with Beck and Benji on the podcast platform of your choice and also on YouTube.
See you, gang.
Thank you.
Signing off.
Bye-bye.